Now this could turn into a series of talks, and it probably will, because I could go on forever about what I want to talk about tonight. But tonight I want to talk about deconstructing the sensory experience using Vipassana, or insight practice, as the method for doing this deconstruction. Basically deconstructing the self. So what Vipassana practice is actually trying to do is put a spotlight on impermanence and emptiness. Have you ever heard the Zen saying that emptiness is form and form is emptiness? This is kind of what they were talking about. Generally, when I would explain this, I would normally go off of the Theravada Progress of Insight map that's found in the Visuddhimagga, which is like a 5th century text, and it's pretty much the most important text as far as the Theravada practice is concerned, just after the Pali Canon. But I wanted to simplify things a little bit tonight. So what I'm going to be doing is giving a rough overview using 4 stages instead of 16. And this is going to be roughly based on Michael Taft's Deconstructing the Self podcast and the map that he's created, but with a few tweaks and craisins. So yeah, I hope you enjoy craisins, because you're gonna have some. Dried cranberries. They're good. I like them better than raisins. I'm not a raisin fan. Craisins are good though. So these stages are conceptual, sensory, or phenomenological experience, impermanence, and emptiness. And the Buddha described 2 qualities to be developed through practice. Samatha, which translates roughly as calm abiding, which is essentially a single-pointed basic mindfulness concentration practice. And then Vipassana, which translates as, it used to translate as clear seeing, now we pretty much just refer to it as insight practice. But it really refers to a specific type of insight based around deconstructing sensory experience through increasingly fine-grained examination. It's an interesting mode of practice that brings deep insights into impermanence. So you may be asking yourself, how do we do this? What I'd like to explain is the process of deconstruction. And the basic approach here is one of examining your experience in fine detail, with the intention of observing what comes and goes with greater and greater clarity. This approach can be applied to any object, the breath, the sensations of the body, a candle, which is called fire casino when you meditate on a candle, a visualization, whatever you would like to work with. But for tonight, I'd really like to use the breath as an example in our object of practice. But if you want to try it with something else, that's perfectly fine. But as I said, I'm going to be working with the breath. So you start by setting up your meditation posture and relaxing and settling in, and then directing your attention to the breath. And basically the task is just to simply see what's going on with the breath as clearly as possible. And anytime the mind wanders, just letting go of whatever the mind is taking an interest in, and then coming back to the breath. It's kind of like we just did, right? As you do this again and again over time, you're likely to pass through a few stages on the way, and these are referred to as stages of insight. But prior to delving into the stages, I think it's essential to note that all meditation blueprints are just rough estimations derived from the most prevalent encounters that people have experienced. So they can be helpful to kind of see where you're at on the path, but don't get too wrapped up in maps, because then it turns into this whole attainment thing, and you're like, oh, I gotta progress on this path of insight. So just maps are helpful, they're a good guide, but don't get too caught up in them, is basically what I'm saying. So, but as long as you're progressing towards heightened sensory lucidity and deconstruction, you're practicing correctly, regardless of whether your experience corresponds with the stages or not. So stage 1, as I said, is the conceptual. In general, most people interact with the world only based on our concepts about it, rather than direct sensory experience. If the phrases "think about the breath" and "pay attention to the breath" have equal meaning to you, then it highlights the point that I'm making. When we open our eyes and we observe the world, we perceive shapes and colors, and then the mind translates these things into information. The eye can only perceive these colored shapes without any accompanying labels. However, our conceptual mind rapidly intervenes and identifies those shapes, dividing them into the familiar realm of separate objects that we perceive. And this happens instantaneously. There's no lag time in this whatsoever. The mind just does it. We're not continuously figuring out what each new colored shape is because the world is already presented to us, pre-organized into labeled objects. This is the way that we file things in the mind. This is the way we conceptualize things. When we become aware of the breath on the conceptual level, we're primarily dealing with intellectual knowledge, such as, I am inhaling, I am exhaling. And at this stage, meditation practice can be really fucking boring, if we're being quite honest. And it's challenging to concentrate when you're just, I'm breathing. I'm breathing in, I am breathing out. This is labeling, basically. So when we label, such as inhaling, when that remains constant throughout the entire in-breath, our mind tends to wander towards something more exciting and relevant. Once we have successfully categorized something and come to the conclusion that it doesn't pose any kind of a threat. So we can just kind of get lost in that, and like I said, it's really boring. Just meditating on the breath and just going, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. Labeling it is boring as shit. Now, labeling and noting are a little bit different. Labeling deals more with labeling would be considered like nouns, right? So like labeling the breath. And then there's the label and the noting would be noting the inhalation of the breath. So it's more of a verb-based thing. Counting breath may make this practice slightly more engaging if you're just using the conceptualized mind, because at this stage the labels change from one breath to the next. However, it still can be a kind of a demanding exercise if you're new to meditation. To get out of this stage, we have to move past concepts and into feeling. So we don't just think about it, we have to feel it. And so to demonstrate this point, I have brought craisins. So I'm going to pass this around, and I would like you to just dump a few in your hand and then just kind of observe them. Like what we're going to do is, we all know these are craisins in this cup. We have conceptualized that there are craisins within this cup. So I'm going to start with you and just pour a couple craisins in your hand and just hold on to them. Don't eat them yet. We're just going to hang out with them. And don't look at them yet. We're just going to hold them in our hand.
I have a cranberry allergy.
So you're the only one. You would. Somebody is either having a really good time out there or a really fucking bad time. I don't know which one it is. I don't know what it is. Okay, so. Does everybody have their craisins? Fantastic. Okay. Now, open your hand. And now look at them. So we're bringing the sense door of vision and the eye into this. So we can look at them and observe all the little crevices and the nooks and crannies and the colors. And then, so we're observing them. We're using our sensory faculties instead of just the conceptual by just observing it. Okay, now take them in. Take one and kind of like roll it between your fingers and feel it. Feel the tactile sensation of them. Feel the weight of them in your hand, right? And take it and you can smell it. And we're bringing our sensory faculty of smell into it. Take it and put it next to your ear and kind of squish it, and you can kind of hear it kind of squish a little bit.
Mine are making a face above my calluses, which also make a face.
That's beautiful. Okay, and now take them and put them in your mouth, and then just observe the sensations of taste and like the texture in the mouth and the flavor, the sugariness, the juiciness, the cranberryness of it. So we've gone beyond the conceptual mind into the sensory. It's just making sense. Good. So I enjoy your craziness. Have you ever noticed that we tend to experience the world through our thoughts and ideas about it rather than through our actual senses most of the time? It's like when we see something, our brain just automatically categorizes it. We have this conceptual mind, and that's what it does. It just automatically puts it in these categories without us even realizing it. But when we start meditating and focusing on our breath, or our craisins in this case, we need to stop thinking about it and start feeling it. We can actually observe it through the sense doors. Think about when you touch something like a hot cup of coffee. You don't need to label it as hot in your mind before realizing that it's too hot to be able to touch. You feel it right away. So when you're meditating, try to feel the breath in the same way without labeling inhale and exhale. We're really just working with the observation without the label attached to it. And as you get better at feeling the breath, you'll start to notice that there are lots of different sensations that tend to make up each breath. You might feel vibrations or a flowing sensation. You'll become more and more aware of the subtle details of each breath just by observing. And it's kind of cool to see how your mind can create all these different sensations. And it can really be kind of a satisfying experience just sitting and just watching the breath. But there's still more to discover. With even more focus and practice, you can reach a point where your mind stops creating these sensations altogether and you enter into a state of pure experience. And this can be pretty transformative, and it's something that Buddhists generally refer to as stream entry. If you're in the Zen tradition, they call this kensho. So if you are wanting to experience this pure experience, just keep going with your practice. Dedicate yourself to your practice and sit daily. Try to sit as much as possible, every chance you get, and you can deepen your practice and get to this level of just pure experience. So stage 3 is impermanence. As you continue to focus on your breath, you may start to notice something interesting happen. And that's that the idea of the breath as a single thing seems to disappear altogether, and then you begin to become aware of a continuous flow of tiny sensations. Tiny little kalapas, as Goenka would call it. If you pay attention to each individual sensation, you might notice that they're becoming shorter and shorter, almost like flickering vibrations. Or if you tune into the overall feeling, you might feel like you're experiencing a flowing river of breath without a clear beginning or end, which is a really weird experience. At this point, you've probably gotten pretty deep in your meditation practice to get to this point. Now, this is the kind of stuff that comes up on these Goenka retreats. You will experience these things on these extended retreats because your mind becomes concentrated enough to enter into these states. It's let go of the usual way that it perceives sensory experiences, and it's kind of an awesome feeling to recognize the mind's creative role in perception. As I said, it's really easy to get to these spots on retreat. It's the whole point of retreat, is to give the mind enough time to become concentrated, to get past our perception and past the conceptual mind, right? And once you start moving through these stages, you can really get insight into this impermanent and not self aspect of these teachings. And unsatisfactoriness, because if you sit for 10 days, it's going to hurt a little bit. I'm not going to lie to you, that shit hurts. But mostly impermanence. In fact, if you go to a Goenka retreat, you will hear the word anicca like 9 million times. I didn't count them, but a rough estimate is 9 million. You have to ask Rusty about it after the group. And again, this can be a pretty profound experience, but again, more to explore. Like, the journey is not over just yet at impermanence. So there's emptiness. Stage 4, emptiness. So I'll kind of break that down for you. Depending on what type of meditation you practice, there are different ways you can experience a shift in consciousness. If you practice Tibetan Buddhism, you might investigate stillness and movement and awareness. This means noticing what stays the same, what changes, and what is aware of both. If you focus on the movement of impermanence, eventually you reach a point where there is no movement whatsoever. It's like a few frames of the movie of your life are just missing. On the other hand, if you practice samadhi or jhana practice, your focus is on stillness. So by progressively going deeper and deeper into stillness, you'll eventually experience pure consciousness, a moment where your mind is completely empty, but you're still aware. Or you can begin seeing life itself frame by frame. And that's actually happened to me after a Goenka retreat. There was like a 3-day period where when people would walk by me, I didn't see it as one static movement. I saw it literally in frames of existence, which was fucking psychedelic as shit, and pretty cool for somebody who used to enjoy psychedelics to be able to achieve these states naturally. For those who practice silent illumination or shikantaza or open awareness, like Zen practitioners, your interest will be in the mind itself and the awareness that observes both stillness and movement. As you rest in this open awareness without trying to control or change anything, you'll eventually reach a moment of non-duality, which is kind of the whole point of this practice in a sense. This means that realizing that events and awareness are not separate, but they're one and the same. Your conventional way of seeing the world as separate from yourself ceases, and you recognize this Buddha nature that is within you. So what's the fucking point, right? What's the point of all this? You might be thinking, okay, right, like, why should I bother with all this shit? Is this just some fancy way of getting high without doing drugs? And kind of, a little bit. And you might remember me saying before that having these experiences isn't necessarily necessary for gaining insight. People wake up all the time without ever meditating. I wish I was one of those people, but unfortunately I have to put the work in. Well, the experiences I described earlier are just one way to reach awakening, and they have been tried and tested over time for thousands of years. There are plenty of awakened beings in the world. I'm sure they just don't go screaming about it unless they're like some of the people I know, or Frank Yang. It's worth knowing about them, but even if it's just to understand what people mean when they're talking about their enlightenment experiences, right? So, and there's some interesting people on the internet that you can reach out to and talk to about enlightenment, that they claim to have attained this enlightenment or awakening that we talk about so frequently. And what's interesting is that they all kind of have a different take on it. And so I don't know that it's the same for everybody. I do think that there is a physiological shift that happens. I think that when we meditate over time, we rewire the brain, and there are some unique changes that can happen because of that. But the main point of these endpoints, awakening, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, is that they take your mind far outside of its usual operating mode. And when the experience comes to an end, you can actually watch yourself reconstructing your conventional experience. So there's a crucial moment where you can see that your conventional perspective is just something that your mind fabricates, and just for convenience rather than truth. And at these endpoints, your sense of being a separate individual just kind of disappears, and you can witness your autobiographical self putting itself back together. If anybody's done like a hardcore psychedelic trip, like what they would call like a heroic dose, this is kind of what happens with the ego death process. So you experience ego death, and then you have to kind of put yourself back together into your autobiographical self. And this can help you realize that the self is more than just an optical illusion, or it is more of an optical illusion than a real entity. Hence the concept of non-self. Does this make any fucking sense? I feel like I'm just rambling. Good. So breaking down the illusion of the self is essential for stream entry, which is one of the 3 fetters that kind of fall away during this experience. The other 2 fetters are skeptical doubt about the teachings and belief in the efficacy of meditation to bring about this awakening. So what happens after this experience? Well, it takes a little bit of time to shake off a lifetime of habits built around a false self. Initially you may continue to just behave the same way that you always did, but over time your view of the world will start to realign. And you'll start to see yourself as a part of the great network of interconnection that is the universe. Again, if you've ever had like a psychedelic trip, you can kind of reach this state, through that. I recommend meditation over that, but that is also possible through the use of psychedelics. So you can the stress that comes from this idea of self, it kind of starts to fall away. Because once you realize that there is no actual fixed self, that there's just this fabrication of the mind, you become more naturally compassionate and altruistic. You know that there is no separation. We know that there is this non-duality. There is no other. Everything is connected. And ultimately, you'll just let go of the fixations and hang-ups that have caused you all the fucking bullshit and difficulties in your past. And you can kind of completely merge into the stream of life without having to hold anything back.